He left the clicker. That's a good start. How do you follow the Olympic Games? Interestingly enough, as Jerry was going through some of the lessons learned, I think you'll hear a few of them in slightly more modest terms as I go through my presentation as well. I was lucky about 3 years ago to start working with Dublin City. IBM decided to put a research lab in Dublin. The focus was primarily to look at urban systems. And as part of that, we approached Dublin City to see if we could work together. The topic at the time was simply open data. We as scientists wanted to get access to all of this weird and wonderful data that moves around the city. And Dublin had a very simple objective. They wanted to see could they create jobs by using open data as a weapon to attract research-led innovation, eventually leading hopefully to some jobs. It was interesting that we did quite a bit of research before setting up the open data site. And in fact, we decided to deliberately not do a Me Too. When we looked around at over 350 different websites around the world, most of them seemed to be rusting quietly into oblivion. Some of them seemed to be interesting. Several others seemed to be completely overloaded with stuff. So we said, look, let's not do that. Let's try and learn some lessons. Let's focus specifically on a research-led engagement, and let's see what happens. This is the sort of question I'll ask you at the end. A lot of what we've done was about extracting hidden knowledge. And it's interesting. Where would you look to find a hospital in Dublin? The answer is not on OpenStreetMaps, and the answer is not in the Yellow Pages or the phone directory. The answer is actually, we discovered through the Dublin system as a result of the work, is actually in a previously and very unglamorously, unloved and very unglamorously named data set called Fats, Oil and Grease database. And the reason is because you have to be licensed to get rid of fats, oil and grease. And in fact, every hospital, every police station, every school has a canteen of some type. So what you have is a very, very, very high precision data set which has geocoded coordinates for pretty much everything with a canteen, a coffee shop, whatever it is in the Dublin region. It's actually way more accurate and complete than any of the mapping software out there. But who would have thought fats, oil and grease would be the place to look for a hospital? Well, as researchers, we immediately went off, and you'll recognize IBM here. We drew a very complex diagram and started to do things. Most of the work that we've done is that reddish pink thing on the top. We decided from the beginning that we were going to use mostly open source tools. We were going to build a documented set of open APIs, and that we would only use available things. An example of an available thing is IPSV, your own integrated public sector vocabulary, as a taxonomy for documenting the data. So the bit at the top is our research work, and then of course we built it on top of all sorts of other things. I'm moving quickly through about 3 years of work here, but let me just give you a quick roadmap of what we went through as we started to build the system. We started out by saying, look, we need something, otherwise people simply won't go there. So we started to put up static facts about the city. And what we discovered really was that we got a lot of the standard citizen apps. Where are things? Help me find bus stops. We had people doing things like geocoding the location of trees. So it started the ball rolling, it got us noticed, people became interested. The next step was to start to put up some kind of operational data. So we moved into areas like planning, which is open data. It's available by going to your town hall, it's just not available online. We began to trip into some of the privacy areas at that point because we began to trip over legislation about what is data intended for. Planning data was never intended to be publicly and electronically distributed. So we had to do a little bit of dancing in order to be able to release some of this data. But it was essentially non-sensitive. There were no credit card numbers and no bank account details in there. We deliberately went for low latency at the beginning because we could curate it manually and keep up to date. Remember, we're still learning at this point. It begins to get interesting when we move into the kind of amber area here, which is where we are still playing, where we started to look at streaming sensor data from the city. So we have quite a lot of real-time traffic information is typically what we're uploading at the moment. For mainly security and some operational reasons, we sample it every minute. So what we do is we take things like GPS probes from public sector vehicles, and if the taxi companies agree, we'll take theirs as well. What it allows you to start doing is building an interesting dynamic picture of the city. And that's where people got really interested. So we have a guy, for example, in Canada who downloads it every minute, who's run it regularly because the feed's gone down. So it's interesting when you start to do this, you realize that, in fact, you're no longer a physical city. You've become very quickly a virtual city. We're now looking at things like water telemetry and so forth, but it's interesting to start thinking about what are some of the security concerns once you start to release this type of data. So again, we begin to move much more into the privacy and sensitive area. But we began to see much of the commercial interest, startup companies, maybe some of the larger companies, become interested between step 2 and step 3. Okay? And then we get into the good stuff. So Dublin, for example, as I'm sure is the case in most of your cities, provides social housing, is the area that we're specifically looking at as a test case. We've got about 100 years of data, some of which is digitized, some of which is still written on parchment. But it's a very interesting longitudinal data source, because what you start to begin to see are things like intergenerational patterns of poverty and so forth. So as a research tool, it's incredibly interesting, but of course it's incredibly sensitive, because you've got details like rent payments, you've got reported incidents like drug taking, antisocial behavior are in that file. So we're currently working through how can we release views of that, maybe in statistical summary form, maybe in cleansed form, for researchers and eventually for businesses. So it's beginning to build an extra dimension to the city. What's happening socially within the city? Okay, so think of that kind of data merged perhaps with social media data to begin to build pictures of where are there areas of need in the city, where are services being consumed, where are the hotspots in general around town. What have we learned so far? So that was a kind of a route map for data. I just picked 6 areas, and I'll echo a lot, I think, of what Jerry's been saying. It was common sense, but interesting. Licensing was particularly interesting. The city discovered that in some cases, technically, they didn't own the rights to release their own data as open data because of the T's and C's they had signed on software particularly, proprietary systems for traffic management with proprietary formats that they simply were either unsure or did not have the right to use. So they've changed their procurement process as a result. So they've included a clause that says you must allow us to release data. Technical standards were interesting, and again, back to what Jerry said. We have just enough and no more. So we did not spend endless days debating which version of RDF or which version of XML should we use. We did a publish and be damned. We picked just enough and we focused on metadata. Legal and licensing is very, very, very important for business. We can handle strict licensing terms. We can lawyer up pretty easily. What we can't handle is uncertainty. So back to the question of who owns your own data. What we like is certainty, because uncertainty is a risk for us. Well, security, of course. The business model is very important. The city is probably at a transition point at the moment. We've got a number of venture capital startup companies who are at the point where they're probably going to turn around to the city and say, we need service level agreements. And the city's going to say, you need what? Because it was never envisaged at the beginning that we would have to provide service level of whatever it is that this particular company wants, but they bet their business on research data. So you need to prepare for success. Data protection is interesting. One of the first things we did was we made friends with the data commissioner in Ireland. He's the same guy who patrols Facebook and Google and so on, so he knows what he's doing. And he was able to help us get out of a couple of binds. And it's good to be able to go to him first, but to have a very clear and open policy that if something's wrong, you fix it. You withdraw the data set, you fix it, and then you re-release it and you fess up. This is very important. Most of the energy in the system comes from people, not from the systems, not from the content. So within Dublin City, they've recruited an army of the willing who go out and do things like workshops, hackathons, talking to the community, working with small companies, holding workshops on themes. This is really, really, really very important. Otherwise, you turn into one of those rusting data sets. If you don't invest energy, it will rapidly degenerate. Now I'm going to transition. So that was Dublin. What are we doing? Think of Dublin as an iceberg. What you see if you go to the site is about 5% of the research work. We have an impedance mismatch. We're racing ahead at a huge speed. It's very hard for anybody to keep up in terms of releasing content. So we've got a lot of goodies hidden behind the website. Everything that I'll show you or talk about can be accessed through the Dublin website. It's just around the back. It's not on the front edge. A couple of things that we discovered. Standards are great, but I can remember a time when somebody told me that a megabyte was an unrealistic amount of memory for a PC. Who would need a megabyte? And a wise old manager at the time said, don't worry about megabytes, they'll be as cheap as water in a while. And the same is true in general of technical standards. You can spend a long time on W3C committees, you can spend a long time agonizing about what particular version of something should I use. I would say just sufficient unto the day, the standard thereof. Don't pick standards for the sake of having standards. Just pick what you need and integrate lightly as you go along. What we did was we focused very specifically on metadata. In other words, how we describe the contents. We don't bother with the actual contents themselves. We have a range of things, everything from CSV files to some binary files and so on. It's been interesting. People want to explore dirty data. They want to explore semi-structured data. It's part of the fun of investigating an open data site. People will solve problems with format for you. So lightweight is very definitely better than heavyweight. It's not big data, by the way, in the sense of volume. The total real estate in Dublin is about 100 terabytes of data within the city, which is, it's, in terms of the Olympic Games, it's tiny. But what's interesting is it's wide. You have lots of labels, lots of conflicting sources of data, lots of things that overlap. So it's big data in the sense of, if you put it all into one big spreadsheet, the spreadsheet would be very wide and very dirty, very overlapping, very difficult to process. So what does this all do for us? Well, it means that things are changing. Expectations of us as service delivery organizations, and I include everybody in the room, are changing. People want a different experience. They want us to focus on things they want. If somebody has an iPhone, they can log on anytime. If somebody has access to open data, they can be an armchair auditor. So they are moving from expectations based on systems, where you have a point engagement for whatever you want, to expectations based on engagement. I'm going to move quickly, because I did want to start, maybe even try and see would the technology support the videos. What you're seeing here is a live demo of a challenge that we did with the city of Minneapolis. I'm hoping that it's actually running. If not, can somebody check at the back? It's how you can automatically, just click to get the video going, how you can automatically, no, it's not going to work. Okay, so, oh, here we go, it is working. So what's happening here effectively is that, I've cut this down, by the way, from about an hour of a challenge session, so it's going to jump all over the place. Effectively what we are doing is we are automatically recognizing the incoming data sources. We are matching them to IPSV automatically. We are checking them for consistency with DBpedia and schema.org, and what we are coming back with is a consistent, documented global data model. So in this case, they talk about American things like liquor permits and so on. Those are all canonically defined within somewhere like schema.org or DBpedia. The advantage there is that every time somebody comes up with a piece of data where they talk about a liquor store or a permit or whatever it is, it has a consistent meaning. Now we can start to join all of these data sets together to do some really interesting things. I didn't get as far as IPSV. So IPSV is in the back, running all of this in terms of metadata. Okay? Let me just move on very quickly to where is the future going. So that's how we help you load and make sense of data. And that's what we use for Dublin. Part of the demo, if I'd gone to the end, would have been me merging data from Dublin with data from Minneapolis to produce a very quick and simple visualization of things across the cities. Where we are going is this sort of system. If you've been watching IBM in the news recently, you might have seen Watson, artificial intelligence, playing game shows and so on, and winning against humans. Well, here we're not trying to beat the human, we're trying to help the human. What we're trying to do in this particular case is show how, and again, I hope this will start, if not, can somebody just click to play. But what's happening here is we're not asking the question, can I monitor traffic? We can monitor traffic, Google Maps does that. What we're asking here is, can you explain why the traffic is congested? And can you predict, based on previous patterns, whether it's likely to be congested over time? I'm sorry, the videos are not my friend today. The outcome of this is that we will look at a particular incidence of congestion in a city, and we will offer you a number of hypotheses as to why it might have, why congestion might have occurred. All of the data we are ingesting is publicly available. So it's using Eventbrite to try and find out where there are public events happening. It's using the city's publicly published maintenance database to tell us where the roads are being dug up. It's using weather data from public sensors. It's using noise data from acoustic detectors. It's using social media to try and find out where people are clustering. So it's doing a lot of parallel processing. It's very sophisticated. It's doing a lot of artificial intelligence type reasoning. But absolutely everything that's being used here is coming from open data sources, the kind of data that you're releasing. So at the high end, this is the kind of thing you can do with open data. Okay? So I'm sorry I had to rush a little bit. I was overambitious and the videos weren't my friend. So I'll leave a few minutes for questions.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much.